Listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to TTR this evening. We have a show focused on, unless you've been hiding under a rock for the last year, then it's going to be focused on Alpha School. And we're going to be talking about what this means for education. We're hoping to go beyond the headlines, especially because we've got Samantha here, somebody who actually works at Alpha School as a guide. So that's going to be fantastic to hear from Samantha on that side of things. But we're going to be looking at the school, looking at what happens in the school, looking at where children are said to spend 2 hours a day on academics to achieve results, said to achieve some of the highest results in the country, in the US. To some, this is this is exactly what education should become or should move into being. And to others, it's sort of Silicon Valley hype, and it's dressed as school improvement, and it's more a business than education. Supporters would say that AI finally allows children to receive genuine personalized learning, something that many teachers have said really over the years, as much as people have talked about it, isn't really possible. So that the advocates will say, well, now it is more possible. But critics out there already are saying, well, where's the evidence? What evidence is there for the claims that this model can lead to student and school improvement and lead to better outcomes for students and all the other stuff besides? So absolutely delighted to host the conversation this evening. I've got Neil Almond, who is a teacher development lead and general AI enthusiast and has his own AI newsletter. Check that out in your own time. And you also have Donald Clark. Donald is goodness me, should I list it all? Author, blogger, writer, speaker, has owned various different companies connected to AI and EdTech and written lots of books about AI in the past. So that's Donald, who's joining us as well. And of course, as I previously aforementioned, we have Samantha, who's zooming in all the way from the US, who works at Alpha School. It's exciting to have you all here. I think it's going to be a brilliant conversation. I'll just give a shout out before we start to Hachette Learning, who are our sponsors at Teachers Talk Radio. If you haven't heard of them, formerly John Catt, they are an amazing publisher of brilliant professional development, books and resources for schools around the world. Whether you're zooming into this in the UK, US, or anywhere else, you can check out Hachette Learning and you can grab any sort of CPD book that you can possibly imagine off the shelves of their online store at Hachette Learning. So let me kick off with an obvious question. I'm going to pitch to you first, Samantha. Can you tell listeners and viewers who haven't come across Alpha before, can you explain in 2 minutes what Alpha is and what actually happens in a typical day at an Alpha school?
Oh, 2 minutes, tall order. I'll try to be concise. Alpha School is a new reimagining of the future of learning that is leveraging technology, specifically AI, to deliver truly personalized, individualized, in fact, education to students in only 2 hours a day. That's the academic part of the day, I should clarify. That frees up the rest of the day to teach life skills in real world, authentic, experience-based ways. There, like you said, are a lot of skeptics out there. So I want to be clear, this is not AI replacing teachers. It's not, I had a journalist come into my school last year and say, where are the robot teachers? It's not that either. It's simply leveraging the technology that's already at our disposal to do what teachers have known is best for kids forever, since Aristotle, Socrates, that one-on-one individualized based learning model. And what teachers, I believe, also know by now is that it eliminates a lot of wasted time and a lot of time spent waiting, right? I already get this. I have to wait for my, for things to get more challenging for me. It eliminates all of that. It also eliminates a lot of the the less preferred, shall we say, aspects of the teacher role, like grading, data collection, things like that. Allows the technology to handle it, and then opens up the teacher role to why I got into education in the first place, why I believe many educators got into the field in the first place, and that is the mentorship, coaching, real world life skills part of what we do every day as educators.
We're going to get into so much in this conversation. So, if you have a question and you're out there right now and you're watching or listening to this, please feel free to write in, post a comment. If it's a question or a comment on anything, please, get involved in the conversation. Just to circle back to the beginnings of Alpha then, what problem with traditional education, in inverted commas, were you trying to solve, Samantha, or was Alpha School trying to solve, in your view?
Absolutely. We started back in 2014, and I can tell the story that our co-founder tells quite frequently. Mackenzie Price, some might follow her on social media. She's got quite a following. But she had her own daughter come home, I believe in second grade. And this was a student built for school, one of those really curious, self-motivated students who loved learning. And sometime, I believe it was in second grade, she came home and said, please don't make me go to school. I hate school. What's going on at school? What are you learning in school? Nothing. I'm bored. The same thing that I think a lot of folks have heard, a lot of parents have heard from their kids. And so Mackenzie, our co-founder, jumped in and said, we have to do something about this. And that the number one problem that she was trying to solve, and that Alpha is trying to solve, is that kids spend 8+ hours a day in school. Shouldn't they love it? Shouldn't they love going to school and have an experience that's enjoyable? Paired with, can we make learning more efficient? Our students, like I mentioned, actually learn 2x in 2 hours a day. And then also adding that life skills component, where I think a lot of educators, parents, adults in general have seen poorer and poorer life skills coming through our adolescence these days. So we're trying to fix that problem as well.
Okay. Do you think though that when someone encounters something difficult or challenging, do you think that makes it a bit more difficult for it to be enjoyable? Do you think that it always is fun? It should be fun and enjoyable. If you encounter something challenging, there's usually a level of discomfort there. So
absolutely. No, and I would say that grit is one of the main life skills that we teach, pushing through challenge. We very much normalize failure here at Alpha and teach kids how to fail, what it feels like to fail, because we all do it all throughout our lives. But I would push back and say quite the opposite. When you're really encountering something challenging at your level and able to overcome those obstacles, whether it's academic or purely as part of life, I find that for myself and with students, that does bring more joy to and more purpose to your life. Absolutely. So it's not about taking away uncomfortable or challenging parts of the day. It's quite the opposite. It's about making those challenges academically more personalized. So like I said, it's not, oh, I already know this, I already get this, or, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so left behind, but it's right at your level of challenge, that zone of proximal development where students are getting exactly what they need academically. And then when it comes to life skills, increasing the challenge, giving students the opportunity to have experiences that they might not otherwise have and overcome challenges that are more purposeful, that absolutely brings more joy and love of school.
Just a couple more things before I start to bring in Neil and Donald to sort of share their first views on things. But just to give context to people, Alpha School is a a group of schools, I guess, across the US currently charging, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Samantha, charging between $40,000 and $75,000 a year. The teachers, from what I read, get paid a minimum of $100,000 a year. With that, I said the teachers, the guides get paid $100,000 US a year, which I think is the equivalent of like £68,000 in UK money. And the total cohort across, how many campuses have you got? Is it 3 or 4, or is it more than that?
Oh, it's over 30 at this point,
30
actually,
campuses. So I
in cities
read,
across the US.
okay, again, I could be completely wrong on this, but the total number of students across those campuses is it around 250, 300, or is it more than that now? That may be outdated, what I read.
It may be more. I honestly don't have that number off the top of my head, like the exact number, but it is definitely more than 250 or 300.
Okay, but which one do you work in?
So this past year, I was the lead guide. As you said, our teachers are called guides for the Fort Worth campus here in Texas. And now I'm the head guide. I oversee 7 campuses in Texas and Oklahoma.
Okay, and how many students, just to give listeners and viewers an idea of the size of these schools, how many students are in your particular campus that you are in?
Yeah, all campuses start off with 25 founding families. And so you can look at a number about 25 for each of those campuses.
Okay. All right, Samantha, we're going to be digging into this loads, but I'm going to welcome Neil on and Donald on. Donald, just to start with then, you've spent a lot of time looking at AI in education in your life. So what's your first reaction to what Samantha said, but also to the ideas there about Alpha School?
Yeah, well, I'm neither a sort of acolyte nor a critic in a sense, but there's a context for Alpha School that I'd like to just lay out for you. I've been watching this. I've been in this business for about 40 years. So there's some interesting precursors, which I think are worth establishing. There's also a lot of evidence off to the side and in parallel about very positive evidence, I should say, from Alpha's point of view, about some other academic trials using that sort of guided, not necessarily teacher, supervised intense learning using AI tutors and so on. But I'd like to start really by Montessori is probably the easiest one, although it's not directly relevant. Nevertheless, Montessori is really interesting because it had a focus on this learner choice. And it was a highly structured environment, where the adults were actually monitoring, and it was very primitive technology. It's a century old, essentially, the earlier part of the 20th century. Nevertheless, people forget that Montessori was, unlike Steiner schools, based on that sort of weird mysticism, or Summerhill that fell apart. It's interesting, I think, from Alpha's point of view, because there's good evidence from Randolph, Lillard. There's lots of studies showing it was actually quite good, the Montessori system, with that sort of supervised, intense sessions of learning. And then the other two are more interesting because they're more recent. And one is the quite famous rocket ship public schools. And they had very like Alpha. They had supervised learning labs, very intense, using high tech, blah, blah, blah. And that sort of worked to a degree, but as soon as they tried to scale, it failed. And that's the real problem that Alpha will fail, the one of scaling. And when I say scaling, I don't mean a number of pupils or number of schools. I mean scaling into the real world, where real people in a real demographic. So as soon as Rocket Ship tried that, they had to change the model. It wasn't as good. And then the other big one, which I think is really relevant, that's where we're studying, if I were an investor in Alpha, is Alt School. And Alt School, that was quite recent, founded in about 2013, 2014. They raised 175 million, built lots of schools, went at a dash, just like Alpha. And the trouble is, it's gone. It's gone. And that was primarily because it just failed to scale into a normal demographic. And I think this is now speculation. I really hope Alpha School succeeds here, because I think they have a slightly different model. But the big problem, the big obstacle here is, on the guided supervised learning is fine when you've got a lot of very rich kids in a room who have a lot of cultural capital and so on and so forth, and they're hugely supported by parents. But if you've ever taught, and I've taught 16-year-old boys in comprehensive schools and maths, it's a different game, because you have much greater keeping them on task is much, much more difficult. You have a much greater degree of behavioral problems, motivational problems, background problems, family problems, psychological problems. So the degree to which Alpha School can scale would concern me. Nevertheless, I'm really interested in seeing what evidence may emerge, and we may come to that later. But that would be my first contextual sort of shot, which is we have to be careful here because people have tried this before.
Samantha, I want to give you an opportunity to sort of answer that really before I bring Neil in.
I think you're right, Donald. I should say that I come from a traditional education background. So I've my largest class size I ever taught was 47 students, high school math. So lots of unmotivated 16-year-old boys, to be sure. And I think what's unique about the alpha model in that sense is that as guides, we're not trying to both teach content, get kids to pass a standardized test, be the school nurse, be the school psychologist in the room, and motivate these kids. It's impossible. And I think a lot of teacher burnout comes from the impossibility of managing all of those roles in the one job of a teacher, especially times 25, 35, or in my case, 47 students, like you said, coming from difficult home lives, or some were hungry, or some were, there's too much going on in Maslow's hierarchy of needs to possibly meet everybody's needs all of the time. So what's interesting about the guide role as opposed to the teacher role is that the primary focus is on motivation. There's also motivation built into the academic system and the apps, which we can talk about later. But when you reduce the ratio of guides to students, or students to guides, I guess I should say, and you take away all of you don't have to be the school nurse. You don't have to be a psychologist or a counselor. You certainly don't have to teach academics and prepare a lesson plan and analyze the data and have a formative assessment that you're leading up to a summative assessment that you're analyzing data upon to everything that all these teachers are also is the main focus of their job every day. And it's just about motivating those kids to work in their apps, get their academics done in those 2 hours a day, meet their academic goals. It's incredible what you can unlock for kids.
I understand the guide thing.
Sorry, Donald,
that's true of alt school as well. I think my question is it's not necessarily the guide being different from a teacher. It's when you have 47 kids with those very difficult backgrounds, does the alpha model scale? Because even guides would find that difficult to keep those kids motivated and on task.
Yeah, alpha doesn't go beyond a 10-to-1 ratio. So your guide is going to be responsible for 10 or fewer students at any given time, which certainly helps. And you might cohort those students together, of course, and typically we do. We put 2 grade levels together in a room, but you'll add more guides to the room as each level grows.
That means it's not scalable then.
Say more.
Well, if it's one guide to 10 and you're in a large school in England with 1,200 people, the costs would be well beyond what the school could afford just on salary bills alone. I mean, if you go from a one-to-many, say 1 to 30, 35 to 1 in 10, you're tripling the costs of the people in the room.
Absolutely. And accessibility of the model is the next phase of what Alpha is looking toward. And I don't know that in my position, I can speak very well to what the plans are, what's going on with that, especially not in another country. But I can say in the model, the way that it works right now for Alpha, it does keep those ratios low, which you're correct, Donald. It is costly.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah. That's the problem, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring Neil in. Neil, welcome.
Hi, everyone. So really interesting conversation so far. I definitely understand where Donald is coming from in terms of that scalability, and it's kind of my biggest concern about the model, but also maybe I am unique, or maybe it might be a sort of a cultural difference perhaps to how teaching is viewed in the US to here in England, maybe specifically, but the idea, obviously, like we have a very high sort of cultural awareness and understanding around like safeguarding pupils, and that is obviously paramount. But I think for us, for teachers in the UK, like we just love teaching the content. And so the idea of outsourcing the teaching of the content for us to worry about the motivation and solely worry about the motivation, I think in terms of where we are in the England sort of culturally, politically, and all of that sort of stuff. I don't think there's that political will to tell teachers we're going to outsource the content so that you can all sort of focus on the more of the pastoral side of things.
Do you think, no, Neil, to play devil's advocate, do you think though that is about, like, I'm not saying it is that, but is that about ego as well? Like in the sound of your own voice a bit?
For sure, for some people, it certainly probably is. But, it's conversations that we have on social media, again, predominantly probably just in an English UK context, is the common one is primary school teachers. And I'm a primary elementary teacher here was when I was sort of full-time classroom teaching. You don't teach subjects, you just teach children. And then you'd get to like the secondary school teachers who'd say, we teach the subject, we teach history and all that sort of thing. That's a very, very sort of common argument that we have here. So yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to see how teachers would react if all of a sudden you were saying we're going to take that way because we think AI, and when the phrase AI gets thrown out a lot, and we need to really unpick what we mean when we say AI. I feel like generative AI has come in, and now people are just using generative AI to be synonymous with AI, which of course it isn't, because there's so many other factors around what AI can and can't do. I just don't think that teachers in England are ready to say that this generative AI system is a better teacher than you, or could be a better teacher than you in the situations that exist in Alpha, which of course comes to all the issues that Donald has raised around that 1 to 10 ratio is just not possible here in the UK right now, and I don't think will be for the foreseeable because of anything, the costing factor of it all.
Samantha,
well, and let me dispel a bit there too. And like I said, coming from a traditional educator background, especially math teachers, all the math teachers out there probably share my love of doing math all day. I completely agree. Teaching the content was one of the greatest joys of that portion of my educational career. However, I'm still able to get that sort of get that fix when it comes to teaching content. It's just, rather than dividing polynomials at a whiteboard to 47 blank-faced stares, I'm able to have that portion done on the apps, and then I'm able to teach the life skills workshops in the afternoon. So I still get to hear the sound of my own voice, which I do. I take no disrespect to that at all. I love, absolutely. I think many teachers do. But what else is? No, I think it's wonderful, and something else that teachers are really great at is public speaking. So rather than, like I said, teaching dividing polynomials at the board, I'm teaching about financial literacy and designing these really incredible and experience-based workshops to teach more authentic life skills that are rooted in mathematics, or perhaps public speaking, or entrepreneurship, or many other things. A lot of our guides actually don't come from a traditional teaching background. Some are entrepreneurs that are coming in and teaching our kids life skills workshops based on their own experience in the corporate world or in entrepreneurship themselves.
Do you think, I heard an interview with Mackenzie, and she was saying that 20% of the guides are qualified teachers. Do you think that matters, that they're not qualified teachers? I suppose you've sort of already answered that question, but because there'll be people out there who'll say I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying in terms of the personalization of learning, and I understand the role of the guide. My sort of question is more around, a teacher can respond to a child's facial expressions. They can respond immediately. They can have a bit of humor. They can have an exchange with a student where the student might experience some sort of social learning in that moment around their peers. Even if it's a negative situation, they can still learn from that because the teacher's reacting. So do you think there's something missing there? I know you have the 2-hour session. I'm just envisaging the 2-hour learning session, and we'll come on to the evidence behind that in a bit. But the 2-hour learning session, let's imagine they're plugged into a machine. I understand they have a break built into that from what I've read as well. But fundamentally, they're interacting with apps. They're interacting with an AI engine for the 2 hours. Let's say then in the afternoon, they do a project. So the project sounds like it's more independent. So they're sort of, again, the guide is there, but the guide isn't necessarily teaching them. The guide is more there if they need help, if they have a question. The guide is there to just make sure things, or is it more than that? Do you think that, are they actually teaching them content in the afternoon then?
Yeah, and this is a total cognitive shift. So let me preface it by saying that this is very future oriented. It is unlike anything that we have already in traditional education. I want to address the point about 20% qualified teachers, and I'm sure there's language differences between American English, UK English, but the statistic Mackenzie mentioned is certified teachers, which I'd be curious, what is the process to become a certified teacher in the UK? I can tell you in America, being a certified teacher does not equate necessarily to being a qualified teacher. To me, what you said, Tom, about, you know, having humor and joy, being a mentor, a coach, an adult role model, you know, those pieces are so much more important to when it comes to being a qualified teacher. So if it's more just about having subject matter expertise to become a certified teacher, well, that is frankly taken, the responsibility there is taken by the apps, which is in many ways a positive thing. When it comes to that human element during the 2-hour learning block with the break in between, I can tell you from firsthand experience, there is tons of humor, tons of moments of those social connection, those moments where you're motivating, the moments where a student is frustrated or having difficulty, and the guide is right there to step in and offer that support and that human element. And the afternoon is certainly not what us traditional educators would call project-based learning, which is just, you know, repackaging the traditional education model in another way. It is completely reframing the way that we look at school and certainly life skills education. Quick example of a workshop I just ran, and I can give you many examples of workshops, but in high school, not to reveal too much of my own nerd lore, but I was on a competitive improv team. And so I have a little bit of experience in improvisational acting, comedy in particular, from many years ago, but I incorporated some of this improv games into a workshop. We did tons of interacting. We went on stage, we played tons of improv games. And at the end of the workshop, what students were expected to do was deliver a 2-minute completely improvised speech from a topic that they did not know beforehand. So I literally spun a wheel of topics that they were not expecting, and they might have gotten turtles, and they had to speak eloquently, relevantly on topic without filler words for 2 minutes. So through this workshop where we're interacting a ton and having that human element, and there's lots of humor, lots of socialization, those social moments, they have this real world metric at the end that shows that, yeah, they've learned this life skill of public speaking. Very, very human oriented.
Okay. I mean, let's pivot then, because that's a nice pivot onto the evidence for this, because Alpha says that students achieve among the top 1 to 2% nationally in the US and can learn roughly twice as fast. So where do those figures come from?
Yeah, so those figures come from NWEA MAP growth testing, which is a nationally normed adaptive assessment that is used widely, prolifically across the United States. These are independent, nationally benchmarked tests, not internal assessments that we create. So it measures achievement, it also measures growth, basically seeing where students are performing compared with other children in the same grade and how much academic progress they make over time. Combining that achievement and growth profile, we have found that Alpha's results are comparable to an exceptionally small fraction of schools, not just in the US, but in the world. The cleaner headline there is that Alpha students, I should say, are in the 99th percentile for both performance and 99th percentile for growth at the same time.
But is that, to play devil's advocate, and it's sort of looping back to what Donald said earlier, Samantha, would that not, you know, the parents of the children at Alpha School are obviously exceptional people who have achieved incredible things in whatever fields they're in to be able to send their children to Alpha. So therefore, I guess, without stereotyping, I guess that would lead me to think that they have a huge amount of cultural capital. They have plenty of sort of environmental and hereditary factors that are going to help them and support them in just being able. I suppose what I'm getting at is, what evidence is there that if you put those same students into a school that was not alpha and was a normal school, that they wouldn't achieve even better than at alpha?
There's, I won't disagree with your point. There's a lot of truth to, the folks who are sending their kids to alpha have achieved, many times achieved great things, but there's also variability when it comes to how involved they are in their students' lives. I had many students that came to us in upwards of second grade who couldn't yet read. There's a lot of academic disparity amongst our students. There's a lot of academic diversity. And I would agree with your point completely, Tom, if it were just, hey, we're in the 99th percentile for achievement alone, but we're also in the 99th percentile for growth, which is difficult to do, especially when you have top performing students or just high achieving students who come in and I nailed it at 99th percentile. Where do you go from there? And for our students, that continues to show, they continue to show growth as well in the 99th percentile.
I'll bring Donald in. Donald, does that satisfy you as an answer in terms of the evidence on alpha?
Yeah, well, of course, from an academic point of view, it's not satisfactory, but I don't blame alpha for this, to be honest. If I were alpha, because these are delicate, these experiments, and if you suddenly open it up to academia to come in, you can really cripple the whole thing. And in actual fact, I've looked at the growth, the Brownsville data and NWA gap time. And to be fair, alpha released this stuff for the public to see. The problem is it's alpha releasing the stuff for the public to see and not independently scrutinized data. And also there's loads of things missing. It's by no means verified academically in terms of a study of any description, because you don't really know what the inputs are compared to outputs. There's no control. You don't know what the demographic of the people are. It's a tiny sample. Intense resourcing is like having a superset of tuition for a few kids and saying, look, they perform really well. But that, I don't want to be disparaging about alpha, because actually the growth thing is really quite interesting, measured by exams. That's really interesting, even if they are generally richer with more cultural capital than other kids. It's worth keeping an eye on, but it's by no means evidence in any real sense of the world, in sense of a government taking it seriously and spending money on your educational policy. Although that's where I think we should widen this out a little bit, because there is academic evidence that's maybe more robust that sort of supports the alpha model a little bit. And I think in the alpha debate that a lot of that sort of missed, by and large, because there's all sorts of models here. To go back to Neil's point was right. The problem with Neil's argument, and I agree with it, it's not going to happen very easily politically, although the British government have just spent 23 million on 400 because of the attainment gap on AI tutoring systems, and that money is now there and being spent. But we mustn't confuse something here, which is teachers are a means to an end. They're not an end in themselves. This is not about teaching, it's about learning. And if we do come up with a system, as we may in healthcare and in other areas of human endeavor, where AI solves a massive problem, namely massively crushing the attainment gap, really educating kids much quicker, cheaper, to an adequate standard that we all expect to be functional in society, then why wouldn't we do it? And we must continue experimenting, because the net result of the education system is pretty horrific. I came from that background where only 4 people out of 1,200 in my school went to university. I sat the 11 plus. Most of the kids were discarded. Half the population are really thrown to the wolves when they exit school these days. So these are serious problems for a democracy and its citizens, and we should be looking at solutions for this. But to go back to the evidence thing, sorry, I veered off there a little bit into politics. The evidence stuff is starting to emerge now. Remember, academic evidence takes ages. By the time you've got the study done, selected your model, you actually do the research, and it's about 2 years. So even the older studies, which are using like ChatGPT 4 type technology, which is 10 versions ago, imagine how good it would be if they were using the current ones. So you got the famous Aureopolis study, and that was in India. I really like studies that are not in Western economies, because I go to Africa every year. If you can solve problems in Africa and India and these poorer areas, then you're really onto something. So that study is quite famous now. It was in Uttar Pradesh, and it had a very large number of people. What was interesting about the studies was they had guides. They called them lab in charges, not teachers, which is interesting, very similar to the alpha model. and the results were excellent. And remember, this is across 83 schools, middle schools in India. Again, maths was the subject there. But I think what was interesting is that guide model. Now, there's other evidence, and there are plenty of studies on this showing what it's like for a teacher to be supervising AI tutors. So there's the Henkel study, which again was about 0.37, 0.4 standard deviation, a massive increase in student attainment. The Google ED one was a very famous one on coding. And then the Desomo trial in Nigeria, which is a superb case study, which I think sort of supports the alpha model a little bit, which was little 30-minute bursts of stuff. Sorry, that I'm wrong there. It's the Ghana one. 30-minute burst on maths, and you get this massive big effect on growth and achievement at the end of the year. So I think the important thing is not to chop alpha off at the knees right now, because there's other parallel supporting evidence for the model, but it still throws back the conclusion I'd come to, which is alpha's evidence is not really evidence at all. That's unfair, actually. I think the growth stuff is really interesting because it's such high attainment. I mean, you really have to sit up and look at those and go onto the site. It's publicly available. It's quite astonishing, but it's the inputs, the demographic of the kids, the amount of resources and money spent to get there that makes it non-scalable, coming back to my original point.
Samantha,
sorry,
or Neil? I'm happy for either of you to come in on that.
So just a couple of thoughts on this broad sort of topic for me is that obviously, we see time and time again on, it could be PISA or any of these international studies that, it's your Eastern Asian countries that come up on top. Why do they? Well, these assessments can't account for the tutoring effect. And, I would imagine as well that I'm sure Alpha don't know how many kids leave their doors every day and then go off and have 2 hours of additional tutoring that's been done at home. Why would they? But, we can't discount that these children are having some sort of additional tutoring outside of, when they're not in sort of an Alpha campus. So I always think that's interesting. And it's why I can't kind of quite get my head around the sort of the 2x a day sort of thing either, because like Donald said, that the 2x claim, it's a lovely marketing claim, however, wouldn't sort of stick up to academic sort of standards by any means. But just kind of quick with this, Samantha, my only sort of experience with standardized tests in the US comes from like TV, where it's literally all just like a multiple choice question. You've got to make sure you have the right 2B pencil. Is the test that they do for that growth, is that like a all multiple choice question, or is it more of a sort of a mixture of multiple choice and like some free sort of open sort of questions as well? I just wonder what that assessment sort of looks like.
Yeah, it's a computer.
I wonder if I could just say something there. You may have mistaken what I said there, Neil, because the 3 studies I quoted were in Ghana, Nigeria, and India, not the Far East in terms of the PISA type things. These were in really poor areas. Sorry?
Yeah, no, I wasn't claiming to that those studies were. I was just saying that in sort of when you look at international studies in terms of PISA and all of that stuff, TIMS and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What comes out top is your Far East or Eastern.
I agree on that. Yeah, sorry about that. I agree on that.
Sorry, Samantha, go on.
Not at all. But quickly to address the tutoring point, again, just reframing the entire model. All of their academics are done on apps. What would be the point of tutoring? There's no homework under this model. There's no, I have to write my essay. I got to have my tutor come and sit down with me. I tutored myself for many years, and there's really no need for tutoring in this model if it is a fully self-sustained kind of inclusive app-based program.
But I think what Neil was suggesting was you don't know whether they are getting the extra tutoring or not, because they're obviously very high performing children. So there may be parents there who are making them do 2 or 3 hours. You're going to see Professor Tom, who's going to talk to you for 3 hours after you've enjoyed Alpha School, right?
I totally hear what you're saying. I would just personally be extremely shocked. I think for most of our parents in our demographic, what's a big draw to Alpha is that their kids don't have homework and that their lives aren't spent on academics,
They
that
don't
they're
do any
performing
homework at
well.
all.
No, the academic piece is really confined to that 2 hours of focused, individualized learning, and the rest of the day, like I said, is focused on those real life human skills that tend to be overlooked.
I mean, I just want to give you a chance, Samantha, to respond, because Neil described the times two thing as more of a marketing slogan, but then he sort of quickly moved on to something else. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that claim that the 2 times learning thing is just pure marketing slogan.
Yeah, I can talk about my own school's performance from last year. At our campus, we did not finish in the 99th percentile. We finished in the 92nd percentile this May, but our students actually achieved 3.9 times their expected annual academic growth. And again, this is the expected growth that's normed nationally and set by NWEA map testing.
Okay, I mean, do you think Alpha would just release all their data, just release it all tomorrow and say, here's all our data?
I don't see why not. Although you'll still have skeptics like Don who will say, well, Alpha released it and NWEA didn't. So it might be a pointless exercise, but I certainly don't see why not.
Do you think if there were like 5 studies over the next 5 years that independently suggested that there was no difference, would you walk away from Alpha?
That's a great question. I came into Alpha myself as a skeptic. Full transparency, I was looking to leave the education profession altogether. I had become so burnt out by the job. And when I found Alpha, I thought, my goodness, first of all, this sounds too good to be true. But if it's not, it's certainly worth exploring. And what I have found in my own, of course, be it anecdotal evidence and experience, is that it absolutely is what it claims to be. And I know I sound like a broken record, but it's not trying to fix the problems in education. It's trying to completely reimagine what education looks like. So it's normal. It should be expected. There should be skeptics, absolutely, of this. And to answer your question, Tom, so if there were 5 academic studies that came out and said this was doing harm to children, of course, I would leave. But what I think Alpha would do if that were the case is fix it. This is a system, an organization, a model, a product that's constantly being iterated upon. We're constantly analyzing the data, leveraging technology and AI, not generative AI, to look at what our students' outcomes are and make changes wherever need be. This is not meant to be a one and done. Here's our product. Isn't it so perfect? Now let's scale it. We are consistently trying to improve. So I don't see Alpha allowing that to happen. And if it did, things would change.
I mean, what would you say when Donald's talking about the scalability side? Because you mentioned there's one guide to every 10 students. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, on average. So in your campus, I'm presuming you don't have classrooms as such, but do you?
We do, actually. Yeah,
okay.
We do.
So let's say in a classroom then, how many do you have in your classroom then in the morning? How many do you have in a classroom in the afternoon? Are they split up into different classrooms? Are they all together?
Yeah, so thinking about one of my campuses in particular, which is a little bit larger than the 25 that I mentioned, which is kind of an average expansion campus's size. You have a classroom for our kindergarten and first grade students, one for our second and third, one for fourth and fifth, and one for middle school students. There's also workshop rooms, a library, things like that. So it is like a real school campus that you would imagine seeing anywhere. And in each of those,
yeah, sorry, go on. I was going to say, in a class then, are you saying there's like 2, 3, 4 children at any one time?
It depends on the campus, but the one that I'm talking about with the separate classrooms for each level, you're looking at closer to between 7 and 15.
Okay.
And in the Austin campus, which is our flagship campus, that can go up to upwards of 25 or so with those combined levels, sometimes a bit more.
All right. Can AI actually teach though? Can AI teach?
It's a great question. I have found that the way AI teaches it challenges my own preconceptions as a teacher, but I would also ask, does every teacher teach very well. I think that the apps, from what I've seen of the apps, it does a very good job. Again, I come from a math teaching background, and what surprised me about our math apps in particular is that it's not just a video, like what I imagine, a video of a teacher working out an example. How would I teach this? Well, I'd work out an example and explain it verbally. It's a lot more visual than that. There's things like for a kindergartner, it might have them, touch the screen to pour a liquid into a glass to learn about measurements. It might have a student, when they're learning about division, drag and drop dots and lines to break up. So it is, as hard as it is to believe, it's very hands-on actually, in ways that it would almost be difficult for a human teacher to teach with resources and whatnot.
So is your answer to that yes? In a roundabout way?
Yes. Yes.
Neil, do you agree that AI can teach?
I think we need to be really clear as to what we mean by AI here. I think what's not been helpful is, and this may just be, again, I only heard of alpha post ChatGPT. So when you hear AI, it's all, generative AI. Now, I fully understand that and appreciate that that's not what alpha's doing. They're not putting them in front of ChatGPT, and the kids aren't saying, teach me how to do, expand out of brackets or whatever it is.
Well, it is LLMs though. It is a
no
chat,
not
necessarily,
no chat, yeah,
but not a chat bot. So it's not an open
but not
chat bot.
Yeah, not chat bots. Okay.
But it's probably using sort of large language models and all of that sort of thing to help it out. But when you look back at what has counted as instruction historically, it's been things like Khan Academy. It's been things like Duolingo. And I can't think, they're fine. No one's going to say, though, that Duolingo is as good as a first language or second, someone, a competent human speaking that language. I wouldn't have thought so. I would have thought, particularly going back to our UK context, if your experience for kids was they're coming in and they're doing a bit of Khan Academy and they're doing a bit of Duolingo, you would not have got all the headlines that you have around Alpha School about how it's going to revolutionize education. It's actually going to be, gosh, what are these kids doing? They're just spending time on the computer, doing Khan Academy and Duolingo. And, we see as well with Khan Academy, he tried, what was the name of his, was it Khan Migo, his attempt to put an AI tutor into Khan Academy? And it failed massively because no one wanted to actually use it. There was no motivation there for pupils actually using that program to use it. So that's where I'm skeptic. Now, I understand things are changing. I talked on Twitter a lot with a hamster who apparently does lots of coding for you and does some work for you on, I think he's been doing some stuff on reading. I think he's been working on, is it Scribble, your handwriting app that you've been, that is being worked on, I think, by the Alpha people as well. Scribe? I can't remember. It's one of those things. And that looks, generally quite interesting. What I think hasn't helped the situation is that when you look at what historically it's been used, it's just, an app that anyone can access at any point. And that's, again, where sort of, I think quite right, a bit of skepticism comes into play here.
Donald, can AI teach? Sorry, Samantha, I'll let you come in
a
sec.
Well,
can AI teach?
Of course it can teach. I mean, it's almost, you think 1 billion people on AI are not learning anything? 1 billion people? Most of those people are actually using it to find something that they didn't know, to take a deep dive into something they didn't know. They're absolutely learning using this technology, even at that basic level. But let's untangle a few of those things. Let me start with the last thing first. In language learning, it's an area I've worked in a lot and know quite a bit about the research there. The two big meta studies, language learning in the UK and most developed countries, Anglo countries in America, is an area of catastrophic failure in secondary schools. Catastrophic. Almost every child does go through a modern language of one description or another, mostly the top four, and hardly any of them can even order a cup of coffee when they go abroad at the end of years of classroom instruction. Very tiny number of people attain any level of even basic competence and fluency. Now, if you look at the people who actually teach English professionally in a more alpha way, you get this massive increase. And there are two massive meta studies here, Zhu and Wang, can't remember the name of the other one, but basically it's about 60 papers showing that actually the whole world who's learning English at the moment, because of aspiration, are using this stuff on their own. You should see these apps, all AI driven. They're absolutely astonishing with full interactive avatars where you can have full immersion, so on and so forth. So that's definitely working it does work in that area. Going back to the 2-hour thing, though, because I think that really was a very targeted and good question by Neil there. And I think the problem here is, what are we measuring? So the 2 hours thing, and it's actually, I've seen two things mentioned publicly by FO2, a times two effect and a 2.6 as well. Though there's a big difference between those two, massive difference. I think I'd question it, because what we should really be focusing on are what are traditionally called effect sizes. And also, what standard deviation do you have from this? There, I agree with the Alpha School model here, because it's actually not that difficult. The other studies suggest you can easily get a 100% or even 160% increase in or decrease in the time taken to get to a level of attainment. I don't think that's abnormal if you really have intense task-focused learning, which is very rare in an average school with 30 kids. Very rare indeed to have kids on task for the whole period and the whole day. In fact, almost impossible. But the interesting thing about some of the measurements that have come out in the studies I quoted there in Nigeria and Ghana and elsewhere is that if you extrapolate from the increase in attainment, you can get a rough guide of how much extra learning there has been. And in both those two studies, one was an extra year of learning. So that was the one in Ghana en masse, and the other one was 1.5 years, sometimes even longer.
What were
So
they, Donald? What were they comparing in the studies, though? What were they?
Oh, these are proper randomized studies with control groups. These are proper external academic studies that come in from the outside, and it's very clear. So these are good studies. I mean, there's a lot of very sort of hokey stuff.
But what's the control group doing versus the non-control group? Is what I'm
okay,
asking.
well, the control group is normally the normalized school experience, as opposed to those who are getting an AI tutor. And the word tutor is really important here, because when you say can AI teach, you have to distinguish between just using an LLM chatbot where kids cheat and so on and so forth, or an AI tutor that has pedagogic principles built into it, primarily desirable difficulty, the old York principle. As soon as you introduce good teaching, effectively, by having desirable difficulty, good feedback, introducing worked examples, all the things good teachers do, and that happens in AI tutors, then of course you get these effects. And that's even with the older LLMs, because most of them are 4 or 4.0 in the studies, but even there you get these really significant effects. And I suspect that when we get the next raft of studies using 5, 5.6 and so on and Claude, you'll get an even bigger effect. So I don't think that claim is outrageous when you have a very, if you can keep the kids on task, but then it throws it back to the 1 in 10 ratio. It's not scalable and so on. So I think there are all sorts of things here that we must, we have to look at the wider set of evidence when we're making claims. Can AI teach? Can't it? You have to go to the evidence. It's not Donald speaking here. I spend all my time reading these papers, and what's disappointing here is when I go into colleges, universities, and schools, I get this AI harms learning because they're all cheating thing. But of course, that's just an LLM. Of course, if a kid goes in, he's got homework and wants to play football, they cheat. They see it as a transaction. But as soon as you introduce traditional teaching or pedagogy, which you can bake into the AI tutor, it's a very different thing. You get these remarkable effects. So the apps that Alpha are using are not straightforward LLM type chatbots, so that would be a mistake. It's much more sophisticated. I've been involved in building many of these things, and it's not unusual to get these amazing effects. The problem is keeping them on task.
Which is where the guides come in.
Exactly.
But I would also say, and in the apps and the platform as well. I can't speak too much to the design and development of them. That's not my scope of practice, so to speak. But they're very well designed. It's a really great point you make, Donald, about baking in that pedagogy. And I do see that. I also see on the platform itself some of those motivational principles being built in. Students you'd be astonished to see how little redirection I have to do of my students, because they are so motivated to get their academic goals met. The way that it's visualized for them on the platform is by closing your rings, just like you would for your steps or your exercise on your Apple Watch. Yes, exactly. It's, I got to get my reading ring closed. I got to get my science ring closed each day. And then students find that very motivating. And when you're doing it, like you said, Donald, in bursts, and it's contained to just those 2 hours a day, and they know that they have workshops and life skills to look forward to, we have found that they're incredibly on task. So the apps are well designed. The platform itself is well designed. I also wanted to mention that there is a team of academicians on the development team who are always quality controlling these apps, looking at them, improving them. So it's not just here's your LLM, like I said, your finished product or whatever. Kids, get to it. They're constantly being improved based on data.
The only thing is, Samantha, is a lot of the year 9s I've taught over the years, if you put them in a room with computers or LLMs and said, follow these things, it would take about a minute for them to be, sort of either fighting or pulling out bits of the keyboard or, whatever the hell they wanted to do, so I just, that's the cynic in me that says, like any learning strategy that you can pull from the last however long you want, right? It depends on the children and how many children there are. And that's, I suppose, circling back a little bit to this idea that the guides are people who are experts within areas, but they're not qualified and experienced teachers. I mean, you obviously are, but I'm saying, there is, I suppose, if it's scalable, then classroom management even comes in. Even if you have 1 to every 10, if you're in a room with 30 and you've got 3 adults in there, that means, once you get over 30 in the room, that's where classroom management comes into it. So
absolutely, classroom management is a part of it. And we would never claim that classroom management isn't a part of it. But I would argue that you don't necessarily have to have been a 3rd grade classroom teacher for 10 years to be able to manage a classroom. A lot of our guides come from coaching backgrounds. A lot of these are very, very high performing, high achieving individuals who we test less on your knowledge of subject matter throughout the application process and more on your cognitive aptitude and your ability to motivate children or motivate people. And so, yes, classroom management is
judge how good you are at motivating. How do you judge how good someone is at motivating?
Have you done it before? Can you give me some examples? What would you do in this situation? Of course, I'm speaking now to the application process, which is a little bit off topic, but I will at least mention that the process to become a guide at Alpha is extremely stringent, extremely stringent. We had 86,000 people apply to become a guide last year, and we hired closer to 86. I think fewer than that, actually. Yeah, it's a very, very stringent process. It sounds like you would, actually.
No, I don't think so, Samantha. My IQ, I'd be let down on stage 1 because you're looking for, I mean, 86 out of 86,000.
So I said 86. But it was less than 100. Yes, out of 86,000. Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting question on motivation, though, and I believe that, I don't know if this is true, but you see it mentioned a lot that the kids are paid sizable sums in either cash or tokens for attainment. Now that's something that would be sort of culturally very odd in our country, I think. But is that true, or is it a bit one of these sort of urban myths?
I know there's so many aspects to this model we haven't touched on. I wanted to talk about, the individualized piece of it, as part of the previous topic. Yes, we can talk about kids in aggregate and averages, but when you boil it down, what I think is most effective about the model is the mastery-based piece of it. I might be in 6th grade, but I can't move on to 2nd grade reading material until I've mastered 1st grade reading material at a 90% or above. That to me is the more compelling part than the app design or the AI components, which I wish we had more time to talk about. But to the extrinsic motivation. Oh, well, I do want to address, which would you rather I address first?
Well, answer Donald's bit first and then move on to whatever you want, Samantha, because we've got time. So dig into it.
Sure. Yes, extrinsic motivation is part of this model, and I recognize that is controversial. Not everybody agrees with that, but it is part of the motivational model for Alpha. Students are paid for their academics. The way that we approach it, though, I think is again, if you're able to cognitively reframe, it's very real world. Don't you get paid for your job?
But shouldn't
We try
learning
to.
be I'm trying to think now in terms of, you know, this model being transposed outwards in terms of, I'm not doing it if you're not paying me my minimum wage. I'm not doing that, Mr. Rogers. I can't be out unless you're paying me for my 10 minutes. I'm not doing it.
Yeah. I mean, the evidence, we have to be clear here, I think. The academic evidence is that extrinsic motivation does not work. I mean, you're talking about 50, 60, 70 years of research on this one. But that's why I'm asking the question, because it may be tied into something else. I was interested in the tokens or possible school trips on mastery. You know, that there are other ways of skinning the cat here, but that still extrinsic, but less than pure cash, because cash has a cost as well. In a secondary school in England, you're only paying something £8,000 a year. You start paying the kids as well, you're just cutting back on the teaching, the resources. You won't have any money for apps. So again, it's extra cost, restricting the scalability of the model, I think.
Right. And as I've mentioned, our co-founder has talked a lot about scalability being the next phase of alpha. And I can't really speak to it. I wish that I could, because it is such a good question. But
what do they get paid, Samantha? What do they get paid?
Our motivational model it's complex. It's not simply, here's the carrot, you know, do your reading and I will give it to you. It's very much tied to their goals. It's very much also individualized, which is another part of the guide role, is to understand kids and help them unlock their potential through individualized motivational models. There's a piece of it that is built right into the apps in terms of that closing their rings. And our students are paid primarily in alphas, which is basically our token economy, so to speak. And then on Fridays, they have the opportunity to shop in the Emporium. So we have a conversion rate for alphas to what you can purchase in the Emporium. And then but like I said, it's much more complex when it comes to, there's other elements baked into it as well. You can unlock experiences if you're able to meet certain goals, whether they're academic or more life skill in nature. You're able to unlock, for example, a room of comfy seating. Hey, if you're self-motivated and you're doing a great job, you're meeting your goals every day, closing your rings, as we call it, then absolutely you've proven that you can sit on the beanbag chair with your headphones on and get your work done that way. And guess what? If all of a sudden you're no longer meeting your academic goals, then you go back into the desk model and then we go from there. But it's astonishingly authentic, in my opinion. In life, we earn things through our performance, through our behavior, whether it's money through a salary, or performance at a job, or in our career, or more nebulous things throughout our life. But that is life.
It's American
I think
life.
It's better than
American life.
I think we've got to be careful culturally here.
Yeah,
it's a very American thing that I think,
a
money-driven view of the world. But I'm not critical of it, really, because I think it's an interesting experiment. Will it work or won't it? But again, it's scalability into other cultures. That would worry me, because I don't think that would be scalable in many other countries.
Neil? And like I said, there's many ways to motivate.
Sorry, Samantha, go on.
No, just that there's many ways to motivate. And I apologize. You're right about cultural differences, 100%. Go on, Neil.
Yeah, no, because I was just thinking, like, again, for my UK-centric thing, I was like, there's a thin line here between motivation and just like pure bribery. Of like, because I think I saw something on, again, it's Twitter, so you can tell me it's wrong, but like, as you alluded to, like, part of the role of the guide is for them to really understand the pupils that they have, and so they were creating like individualized like Amazon wish lists for like these children, and like
not like that.
No,
more experience based is what I was referring to. More like I know one of my students is a huge fan of Taylor Swift, and she's struggling with reading. So I let her know the way that you can. Let's say this: if you're able to get one of your reading lessons done, and it's always based on mastery at 80 to 90% or above accuracy, right? There's no grades. I'm not you earn an A, you earn a B, C, whatever. The expectation is mastery at Alpha. So if you get a lesson done at mastery, we'll do a 5-minute Taylor Swift dance party, you and me, and that's motivational as well. So I don't want it to sound so capitalistic of we're just handing out cash to these kids as they do their academics. It is an ecosystem with lots of different motivational strategies built in.
Yeah. I mean, I want to sort of open it out to Neil and Donald, because these two guys are AI bods, I would call them. Okay, so I want to open it out to Neil and Donald to ask you some questions next, Samantha, and just let them sort of any questions they've got, really. Neil and Donald, feel free to chip in with anything you're desperate to ask. I'm sure there must be stuff you want to ask.
Yeah, so I say primary school teacher, so like teaching kids to read and like predominantly like decoding, so like initial phonics, right? Like, so super important. I've taught children how to do that, and I just can't see how a AI is going to be able to do that effectively when you consider, you know, regional accents in terms of all of that stuff, and like, you know, how accurate is it going to be? So at that level, there must be some adult teaching, right? There's got to be.
Bingo. Yes, there's a reading specialist on every campus, at least one. Yes, bingo.
Yeah, you don't hear that very often, so thank you for that. That's
yes, nailed it. Absolutely. The early literacy, phonics, phonetic awareness, all of that is too important to not have a reading specialist overseeing and teaching every day.
And the stopping of that is just sort of based on, again, some sort of mastery.
Right, the students are given, oral reading fluency test, DIBELS. I don't know if you use that in the UK as well. But yes, always rooted in data, of course, and assessment. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's super interesting.
Sorry, Donald, go on.
Yeah, I have a question here. Having built some of these systems before over a number of years and seen them in action with different audiences, I think there's an interesting, I think Alpha has just started, in a sense. It's an infant or baby at the moment, but I think the model has room to breathe. When it breathes, it will pick up on some of the evidence. So in my experience, it's very age related, but as Neil rightly said with phonics and so on, you do actually need teaching in those early years. And I think Alpha got to be a bit careful about saying there are no teachers, but I don't think they do. And you've been very honest about that. And you can still use AI there, but it's AI supporting teachers with kids. Mm-hmm. So there's good evidence that can work. Then there's the guided, supervised AI, such as Alpha are using at the moment. And then when you get to older kids, and I've seen this myself with my own kids and homeschool kids, when you get really motivated kids in coding and maths who are really good at it, you can have kids with AI on its own, and they will use it at home. They'll do all sorts of things. And I think we've got to see this more as not just one guide, 10 kids with an AI, with some apps. You've got to see it as almost a step process as you go through age. And by the time you get to university, you have some great studies from places like Harvard on physics, where the AI tutor on its own does all the work, because those kids are straight A students. They're smart. They're at Harvard. They're paying $100,000 a year. They're going to do it, you know. So that you don't need to worry so much about motivation. So I think it will be a more differentiated model that's ideal, and that's why I really hope that the AI Tutoring Pioneers program in the UK, we're spending a fair bit of money on this across English, maths, science, and I think languages as well, Neil. So it'll be interesting there because it's got good money. It's year 9 to 11. And really, it's tackling a big problem here, which the current system doesn't. 450,000 disadvantaged pupils they're targeting with a sizable amount of money. And I hope they pick up on some of the things that we've heard from Alpha today, because some of them are very good indeed, backed up by other contextual evidence, if not Alpha themselves. So I would hope that we have something to learn from Alpha here, because every country will be doing this. You can't have AI suddenly transforming this area and that area and imagining it won't touch learning or education. In workplace learning, it's happening on scale already. So it'll take a while. I think you're right to point out the cultural barriers, Neil, in different countries have different barriers. But there's almost an inevitability about this. We now inhabit the universe with entities that are more intelligent than us. And to imagine that they can't teach better than us, I think we might need some humility around that, because they can already teach some things better than us, I think. So, you know, I'm glad Alpha exists. I don't believe the evidence from them, but other evidence supports the trajectory or direction of travel.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if a private school here in England, adopted an alpha, almost, it was an alpha school, just, picked up, because in the private sector, it could definitely work that way. And again, that's where you get the differences between how we see education and how it's more centralized over here in the UK. And it's a bit more of a smorgasbord of any kind of education that you want over in the States.
There was one thing I wanted to pick up on, Samantha. I watched an interview actually with Mackenzie, and she was in the afternoon when you do you come out of the 2 hours and you do. I know it's not project-based learning, but it sounds like it when you talk about the different things that you're doing with the children, right? They're set. I guess it's a bit of everything, right? From what you're suggesting, I've seen videos where they're playing the piano. I've seen videos where they're doing public speaking. I've seen videos where, etc. They're doing all sorts. But one of the things she said so she mentioned the word creativity a lot. She mentioned the word grit a lot. She said grit. So she said, she gave the example in this interview about grit. She was saying, a child who can solve a Rubik's cube, run a mile without stopping, start juggling successfully. I don't know. So I guess what I keep coming back to in my head is, and this is I have got a very open mind about this, by the way, very open mind. Okay. I am quite traditional when it comes to my thinking about traditional classrooms and their value and sort of the traditional setup, but I'm also very open-minded. I'll prove that because in 2016, I wrote an article for the TES called The Future of Education I think I picked like 2035. You'll have to Google it. It was picked up by Google as well. So it was Google for Education and TES. And basically it's a little bit like the alpha model, but you can Google that. But what I'm saying is that, that with regards to grit, there's a part of school life that is like, you need to do something that you're not going to enjoy and you don't want to do. Hence why I don't think that really happens in alpha. Because if me as a student, if you said to me, Tom, as a 14-year-old, you're going to sit at a computer without much sort of an adult sort of over your shoulder saying, do that, just sit at the computer, complete a range of activities, including quizzing and so on, and comprehension activities. You're going to have a break in between. So you get 20 minutes. So you do an hour, then you get a 20-minute break, then you do an hour, then you're finished. Do that. Then you're going to go off with Miss Parlow into a sort of drama area, and you're going to spend 2 hours or 3 hours doing the activity you described earlier. I'm saying there's okay, children, think of the national curriculum in and the way it's delivered in England as an example. Like, there's things the students will have to do that they are going to find boring. They are not going to like doing. Is that not important when it comes to grit and resilience, to do things that you genuinely like? I really don't want to do this. Like,
have you ever handed an 8-year-old a Rubik's Cube, Tom?
Well, true.
And said,
true.
you cannot graduate 3rd grade until you solve this on your own.
But
or a 4th grader, juggle, until you can juggle for 45 seconds, you can't graduate 4th grade. I mean, and my point being, there are elements of the school day that test and challenge students' grit and put them in situations that are perhaps uncomfortable or even boring to them. But the belief that I hold and that Alpha holds is that students should love school. They're spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 18 or 15, whatever years of their life, sitting in that classroom. And should we focus on, well, it should be boring because that teaches character and it builds grit, or should we build in grit to a system and a school day that they actually
do you think it challenges them? Do you think it's nice because it's easy?
No, it's not easy at all. It's not easy at all. And so here's the other thing. I look back on my school days. School was incredibly easy to me. And I was one of the students in the room who I got it the first time you said it 2 days ago. And now I'm sitting here bored out of my mind. Just the amount of wasted time. That was easy, right? And being bored in and of itself, I would argue, is not a good or productive use of time, especially, certain developmental ages, like when there's just so much more productive things that you could be doing. And then in terms of, is there challenge? Are there challenging moments? I would say Alpha, in my experience, and I've taught in private schools, public schools, I've taught kindergarten through high school, I've taught in the US, I've taught in Mexico, Mexico City. I've seen lots of different learning environments, and they largely look the same. Alpha is so different, and I would say that it is the most challenging of all. Kids are learning in their zone of proximal development every day, individualized learning, challenging them academically, and then in the afternoons, it's not just fun and games. These are experiences that are designed to challenge them beyond what most adults would think is possible for a kid that age.
And what if, like in a typical school, like what if I just don't try and don't care and just do like not a very good job? What happens in Alpha School if I disrupt a lesson or just don't want to do it and just do a bad job?
I mean, do you want to get into our whole behavioral curriculum, our behavioral model?
I'd love to.
Oh man!
Could we just stick to that model before we do the behavioural thing? Because
sure.
I'd like to defend Samantha and Alpha here a little bit. The schooling system has become, even since I went to school, ridiculously academic in my view. I mean, I sent my kids off. I have twins. Sent them off to school at 5. At the end of the schooling, they'd done very little other than read, write, and critique text. That's it. Every lesson. They go to university to do a master's, come out with £50,000 worth of debt. What did they do? Read, write, and critique text. The whole thing has become so academic and so text-based. And then I worry about the employability, and look what's happening. Graduate opportunities are plummeting. They're all saddled with £50,000 worth of debt. And what skills do they emerge with? And I applaud this side of the model because I would be interested down the line to see what employability is like for your kids, Samantha, because I suspect it would be quite good. We decimated vocational learning in this country.
This is ridiculous, because this is like 200 children who, even if you stuck them at, like, they're going to get amazing
I agree
jobs.
With the scalability. I agree with the scalability, Tom. I think you're absolutely right there.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, if we don't address this issue of re-establish the 50% of kids who don't go to uni, who are abandoned by and large, 1 million NEETs are on the streets right now. I know those kids, and I do a lot of grassroots work in football, sponsoring stuff, because they need this practical life. If you've worked with 16-year-old boys before, as we all have, put them on a football pitch with somebody managing them, with adults, and see how they behave. And we get that in schools, but there are other things. There are other kids that prefer computer games and hobbies and ornithology or whatever, And I think we've stripped that out of the schooling system. It's become so ridiculously academic and text-based that it doesn't serve learners well in terms of employability. We have 1 million kids who can critique Macbeth, but nobody who can build or do anything. And I feel quite strongly about this politically, because I think we now have a government who's made a lot of noise about this, but they always do. But until we get off this treadboard of every school focusing on getting kids into universities, we will have massive social problems, because even those kids aren't.
So can you teach skills like creativity then?
Well, I don't think creativity. I mean, I was an employer. I have never been in an interview saying, "Oh yeah, here's a job. Oh, by the way, I went on a course in creativity." I would show them the door. I mean, these abstract words they all begin with C: creativity, critical thinking. Employers don't ask those things. It's like something you see on a slide at an educational conference. What Samantha's doing, I think what Alpha do well here, is encouraging kids to get motivated about their interests, hobbies, dispositions, and they learn a lot through that. They learn a lot, sort of like they get streetwise, and they get life skills, how to deal with other people, working teams, and all that sort of stuff. But I think we're too obsessed by turning things into these little essences, like creativity or critical thinking or collaboration or something, when it's actually you have to do it in a much more sophisticated context, which is what vocational places do. I do a lot of work in colleges, vocational colleges, community colleges, you would call them, Samantha, in the US. And I think they've been starved of funds here. I mean, we have absolutely decimated that area, and the economy's tanking. So all that investment in sending kids to university didn't really work economically. So I think there's something in this afternoon side, which we didn't discuss so much, which I really applaud. Because I think if you do compress the academic stuff down, it just frees up that space, that room for all that wonderful
But
stuff.
how do you? I'm sort of getting to the point of what's the objective, and how do you know they've achieved the objective? I suppose that's more to Samantha, but also to Donald. I mean, Samantha, from an alpha perspective, in the afternoon session, what's the objective, and how do you know they've achieved that objective?
And I will say this is where, and hopefully, I don't get in trouble for saying this, but this is where it does get a little bit more traditional when it comes to education. There is an objective for our life skills workshops. Now, it might not be, the objective that you or I think of as teachers, but it is tied to that core life skill that we're trying to teach. So, to give you the example of that, my public speaking workshop, the public speaking is the skill. Right. The objective was, and I can't rattle it off the top of my head. It was very sophisticated. Take my word for it. But it was essentially being able to improvise a speech with under these, this rubric, so to speak. Right. No. Yes, less than 5% filler words, or it had to be 2 minutes long. It had to, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a test at the end. We call it an alpha test, and we invite the parents. They do it in front of an audience. And public speaking is a great example for that, because typically you're up on a stage with a microphone doing public speaking. But there are tests of grit as well, grit and hard work, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, teamwork, leadership. And they are tied to objectives. I think it's interesting you bring up creativity, because that is not part of our life skills curriculum necessarily. Creativity is a journey. It's something you develop, but I would argue it's not something you can directly teach and test. But there are other life skills that you can.
I guess, Samantha, when we say you do the academics, like what do we include in the academics? Like what is that? Is that just maths and English and like a bit of reading, or is there other things as well? Does it kind of, again, because I could be sort of tainted by our model here, but you can pretty much guarantee that certainly at like the primary, elementary level, like every day kids are doing reading, writing, and arithmetic and maths, and for example, like that. And at primary, I think that's probably right. So what is the academics at Alpha?
Reading, language, vocab, math, of course, math fluency, which we separate as a math teacher.
I think you mean maths, Samantha.
Oh no, I mean math. Although I do find that charming.
Neil, you're horrible.
So when you say language, like English language, like not like a second language.
Grammar and stuff like that. Syntax, right?
So I guess when do they learn about American history?
So it's actually very interesting. It's embedded into the reading curriculum.
Okay.
You have to be able to read, right?
Yeah.
And then as they get older, there are opportunities.
Is that AI generated though? The content they're reading?
No. Gosh, no. Okay. No. They're reading. Of course, civics texts, history texts, and then classics as well. I looked over a kid's shoulder the other day, a 5th grader girl, and she was reading Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. It's diverse in terms of what they're reading, but I think it's fascinating that it's infused into the reading curriculum rather than being its standalone subject.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
You did ask an interesting question, Tom, about on this issue of whether you can measure the stuff in the afternoon, and I think you answered that adequately, Samantha, because I think you can. And I had direct experience. I had twins, sent them to school. One left school at 18, hated the whole academic thing. But what he did manage to do outside school was learn to read music and play the drums. Now, he went on as now quite a successful business guy, hires graduates, left school at 18, another one who was very academic. And again, at school, he was interested in Taekwondo. He eventually became super good, got in the England team. He was the British champion for a while. Nothing to do with school. And it used to drive him crazy because the PE teacher was Welsh and only interested in rugby. And so
quite right.
Yeah, it's fair enough. In my school it was only football. But I think it's interesting, this widening out a range and playing to kids' natural sort of interests, hobbies, dispositions is a really powerful thing. I've worked with a lot of young boys, especially, working class kids from housing schemes in Scotland. And when you just waken them up or you find their interest, it's a completely different, literally, ball game, because it's football was my thing.
But not all of their
changes.
interests are going to be. My experience is with a lot of children, if they don't have structure, if they don't have direction, if they don't have instruction, if they don't have boundaries, if they don't have very specific sort of parameters around what they can or can't do. I mean, I completely agree. Listen, I think the UK curriculum is way too narrow. I think it's way too narrow. So I'm all in favor of the stuff you're saying. I'm just suggesting that this idea of, as I say, when you extrapolate the model out to like large classrooms in the areas that I've taught in, only my experience, but I wasn't looking over, Alfred's shoulder and seeing, Alfred reading Shelley when I've, just gone and walked around. So, he's reading Frankenstein. How lovely. It was like, that didn't happen. That's not a down on the kids. Taught some fantastic kids, but the kids, this is what I'm saying, for academic and engaged and, responsive children, I see it as I think you could absolutely argue for that model. I think the question for me is how it can be sold as something for everyone. That's where I would have my questions really about it.
You have far more chance, I think, of capturing those kids with a non-academic portion of a curriculum, in my experience certainly, than forcing them to sit for the whole 7 hours in period after period just with textbooks and blackboards doing academic subjects. Most of them are we have this increasing problem now, and many of them not even turning up to school because they see it as a sort of game in which they're not part of. They genuinely see that. I understand that. I understand why they wouldn't turn up to school, because they look out the door and
I've
go,
got nothing against the idea of online schools, for example. I've got nothing against the idea of different. I mean, I was at a launch event actually for Ohana yesterday in London, which is essentially an online school. So I've got nothing against. I think it's a really interesting area. I think there's a huge amount of really interesting things happening in that area. I think there's loads. I mean, listen, this conversation could have gone on for like a whole day. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I've just got one more thing I wanted to ask Samantha, and it was around one thing that you think AI does better than the best teacher.
It's a great question. I think it boils down to the speed and efficiency of data analysis and response. When I had, and I won't even say, my biggest class, so obviously was outrageous and unreasonable, but, typical class being, let's say, closer to 30. Even with 30, or even a smaller class of 22 kids, right? Even with that amount of children. You cannot reasonably, as a human being, know exactly where each and every kid is at, what they're understanding, what they're not understanding, what components of the content that you're teaching they're understanding, not only, session to session, but day to day, minute to minute, and respond to that adequately in order to improve their outcomes. You're lucky if you're able to grade the midterm and adapt your curriculum in time to improve your outcomes on a final exam, right? And certainly not on an individual level. So I think that is the piece of the AI, the app stack that we have that I have been most impressed with, is how truly individualized it is and how quickly and efficiently it not only analyzes the data, performance data, minute to minute, but responds and improves.
And what's one thing you think the best teacher, not guide, a traditional teacher in the traditional teacher role, what's one thing you think the best teacher can do that AI will never be able to?
Most everything else, right? The human element, the most important part of education that we all agree is you can't have upbringing, you can't have education without that human element of the teacher being there to guide, to mentor, to coach, to discipline, to set boundaries, to provide social learning opportunities, to to, so to speak, analyze the human data, the social elements. I'm going to sit these two kids next to each other. I'm going to joke around with this kid, that kid. There's something wrong right now. I need to figure out what's going on and address that. Most everything else, but I think where teachers, and the best teachers certainly, there's a lot of waste and burnout as a result, is there's things that are part of the teaching role that could easily be taken over by technology, whether AI or otherwise, and that we should lean into, right? Do I need to sit here and analyze the data, grade these papers, take the attendance, all of these different things? It's a waste, in my opinion, of teachers' time and talent. And so leaning into those human elements, coaching, mentoring, is exactly what this alpha model is doing.
I agree wholly with that. They can just pick up on one expansion onto the AI side, Samantha. The focus that AI has now, that it has almost infinite memory. No teacher has. We're like our kids. We have limited cognitive working memories. We can hold about 3 or 4 things at one time. AI can actually hold all the prior knowledge of a child, all their misconceptions, their progress, track it in a really detailed and consistent manner, as well as deliver the good pedagogy in terms of feedback and personalized teaching. And I think that's the great strength. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Samantha, about its strength. In fact, AI is just getting better and better at that all the time. The memory which an AI teacher holds is bigger than all the combined teachers in the whole of England, if you want to put it that way. It can be. Literally, that's mathematically possible. So I think the future can only get better for these AI tutors, whereas human teachers are cognitively capped. We're evolved animals. Our working memories aren't going to get any bigger. Our ability to actually diagnose the misconceptions in maths amongst 30 kids in a room is incredibly limited. But it's actually possible to do it all with AI. So I think
relationships you can't know.
No, I agree with that.
And
I
being
think
able,
fully agree.
That's the bit in it. It's being able to get children to
and I mean,
learn.
you don't even need AI to do it. A database would do that. You could use, I was using ed tech tools that would do something similar. I'd ask them a question, they throw up a flashcard or whatever it is, I'd scan the room with my iPad and it would get it all down. But I think I understand that where Samantha and Donald are coming from. I perhaps am more hopeful, naive, that I think there are pedagogical things that teachers can do to get pretty decent, highly accurate samples of where kids are. Now I fully understand that would need to be fed off into some sort of system to keep track of it, because I think a really interesting space for AI is actually exactly as Donald has said. How can we leverage AI to support the limits of working memory that teachers have, rather than it being necessarily. And I think that for me, that's a more interesting use case, rather than perhaps saying let's put kids in front of on a computer to do some AI bits and pieces, and they're sort of academic learning that way. So I think we'll see. As technology evolves, I think we'll see sort of both avenues being explored, and I think that is pretty exciting. And I certainly wish Alpha all the best, because we certainly should be trying to see these models do. I'm very I'm evidence based, and I generally mean that. If evidence says pay kids to turn up to school, I will change my mind and say maybe we should give kids 10 quid to rock up to school.
You picked on an interesting element there, Samantha. I was gonna, just touching on this. Do you think? And I'm going to really upset some people out there now by asking you this question, and you may upset people in your answer. I don't know. Do you think things like mini whiteboards are just silly based on everything that you've said?
My kids use mini whiteboards every day.
Oh, darn! I was hoping you.
Sorry. not too inflammatory, but it's true.
Love a mini whiteboard.
I'm trying to think of other things that are completely anti-tech that people love.
We teach
where you'd be like,
cursive. Yeah, we teach cursive. Absolutely. I mean, heck, we teach our kids to juggle, right? But no, they're reading novels, writing cursive, using a mini whiteboard. All of those things absolutely still have there's no replacing that. Absolutely not.
All right. We're going to wrap up because we've run out of time, but I just want to give a massive shout out at the end again to Hachette Learning, who support everything we do at TTR. So thank you, Hachette Learning, for supporting this show and every show at Teachers Talk Radio. So check out Hachette Learning. That's HACHETTE Learning. They're a massive publisher, loads of books for teachers to tuck into. Huge thanks tonight to Neil, Donald, and of course Samantha as well. Make sure you head over to the TTR website. We'll publish this as a podcast. So if you've only just joined in the last sort of 10 minutes, then check out the podcast version as well. Really enjoyed the chat. We'll probably need to do a part 2 at some point, Samantha, if you're up for that.
Certainly.
I think there's still quite a lot to sort of engage with in this. And it's been a really, really good conversation. So thank you very much, everybody. And see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek. Honestly, I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.